I welcome everyone to today's hearing on the need to reauthorize the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. September 11, 2001 was among the deadliest days in American history, with almost 3,000 lives lost in New York, at the Pentagon, and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, because of the terrorist attacks in the United States on that horrible day. But the casualty number is much higher than what is often cited as statistics tell us. In fact, we really do not know the full casualty count from the events of that day, even now almost 18 years later. That's because years after 9/11, tens of thousands of the first responders who ran towards the raging infernos and toxic clouds unleashed on that day, as well as members of the community surrounding the 9/11 crash site in New York, continue to develop and suffer from cancers and other severe diseases that have prematurely ended their lives or undermine their employment and life prospects. Indeed, by one estimate, up to 400,000 people may be at risk of developing 9/11-related illnesses, and many of these people may not even be aware of that fact. In recognition of this continued suffering, Congress, among other things, reopened the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund in legislation passed in 2010, signed into law in 2011, and authorized the Victims Compensation Fund for 5 years. Congress established the original fund just 11 days after 9/11 to provide compensation for those who were physically injured by the attacks and for relatives of those who were killed. That original fund operated from 2001 to 2004 and awarded over $7 billion. When it reopened the fund in 2011, Congress expanded the eligibility criteria to include workers who assisted with debris removal in the months after the attacks. Congress then reauthorized the fund in 2015 for an additional 5 years and is currently set to expire in December of 2020. In reopening the Victims Compensation Fund, Congress was addressing the fact that responders and recovery workers reportedly significant higher risks of lower and upper respiratory diseases than the general population within 5 years of the 9/11 attacks, and 70% of the 9/11 first responders suffered from new or worsened respiratory symptoms in that time period. These diseases only worsened in severity over time as they developed into interstitial lung disease and sarcoidosis, conditions in which lung function substantially deteriorates, preventing adequate oxygen from entering the bloodstream and vital organs and leading to additional life-threatening conditions like pulmonary disease. Now, we are seeing that one of our witnesses, Dr. Jacqueline Moline, characterizes as a third wave of 9/11-related illnesses, including the increased cancer rate among first responders and community members since 2015. Part of that reason is that cancer can have a very long latency period, meaning the symptoms of the disease may not manifest in a person for decades after the initial exposure to carcinogens. In the face of these trends, the fund, which is overseen by the Department of Justice, has done an admirable job. As of April 30, 2019, the Victims Compensation Fund received nearly 50,000 claims, found about 24,000 claimants to be eligible for compensation. It's about half, and made initial or revised awards for 28,000 claims, awarded a total of more than $5 billion as of April 30. Unfortunately, the fund is now facing a funding crisis, one that is not of its own making. When Congress reauthorized the Victims Compensation Fund in 2015, it prohibited the fund from spending more than the appropriated $7.4 billion to pay awards and administrative expenses. By law, the fund must annually reassess its policies and procedures to assure, among other things, that it does not exceed this spending cap. Yet since 2015, the Victims Compensation Fund has seen an increase in claims driven by various factors, including a marked increase in cancer claims and claims from the survivor population. The result is that effective February 25, 2019, the fund was forced to institute substantial cuts to pending and future awards, 50% cuts for claims on or before February 1, 2019, and 70% cuts for claims filed thereafter. Congress has proposed a solution, H.R. 1327, the Never Forget the Heroes, the permanent authorization of the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund Act, would authorize the VCF until 2090, ensure that sufficient funds are available to pay future claims, require payment of any award amounts that were cut, and make a number of other useful changes. By enacting this legislation, we will not have to force 9/11 responders and survivors to come begging to Congress every 5 years to step up and do the right thing. I am proud to be a co-sponsor of this bill. I'm proud because this is not simply a New York event, and I see Mr. Zeldin's here, who represents part of New York and showing his interest, as well as Ms. Maloney and Mr. King. And Mr. Nadler has been a champion of this issue and is chairman of this committee and primarily responsible for this hearing. But this was an American tragedy, an American event, and I recall it so vividly. And I was in New York within a month, and going to a baseball championship game and ran into Giuliani, who at the time was a friendly guy, and got me somehow down to 9/11, and I went down there and had my mask and you name it, and walked around in the debris. I commend all of you for what you did. You put your health and your life at risk. We know that, and you need to be compensated. You're American heroes. Representative Maloney and King have introduced the bill that will affect the work on behalf of 9/11 responders and survivors. I thank them, and I thank Representative Collins for his co-sponsorship of the bill. I'm thankful for the responders for the service and sacrifice for our country, grateful to them, to the survivors, and all the witnesses, and to testify before us today. This is a bit unusual because this is my subcommittee, which I chair, and I'm chairing it now. But it's a special moment for Mr. Nadler. This is an issue that's very close to him and his constituents, and for that reason, I will surrender the chair to him to oversee this meeting, which is appropriate, and I guess this is the time that I'll do it. I don't know if it's the right time, but this is the time I'm doing it. Well, I'll recognize Mr. Johnson then, and then I'm surrendering the chair.
All right.